Good morning, partners. Thank you. Happy Friday. And thanks for being here on our final day of our virtual agency conference. We're really excited that you're here with us today and grateful that you made the time in your morning to be here. I am excited to be the final session of this conference. I'm joined by a truly amazing advocate here today. Just some housekeeping. If you have any questions during our session, feel free to put them in the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your screen, or feel free to chat. If you have any ideas that pop up while we're presenting and you want to share them with the group, please feel free to use that chat function as well. So I am going to introduce myself. I'm Kimmy Lovano, Director of Advocacy here at the Greater Cleveland Food Bank. And I am joined by Jory Novotny, who is the Director of External Affairs at the Ohio Association of Food Banks. Jory is actually joining us from Columbus today. She made the way up because this work is so important. Jory graduated from Youngstown State University and began her career as an AmeriCorps Vista at the Akron Canton Regional Food Bank. So she's been a food banker for more than 11 years now. And in her role at the Ohio Association, she leads all of the communications, development, grant making, and government relations work that helps support the 12 food banks across the state of Ohio. Now, our goal today is to speak a little bit more about effective ways of reaching out to our elected officials at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. Hopefully, we'll also talk more about engaging our media partners, our social media platforms, and just to get more people in the community engaged in advocacy work. I think the first thing that most folks say when I tell them that I work at the food bank and that I work in advocacy is, why does a food bank do advocacy work? Why is that important? And I think it's important for a number of reasons. And at our food bank, our advocacy work centers around helping our clients reduce the difficult choices that they face in putting food on the table. That is really the center of all that we do in our advocacy. All of us here know, all of us on this call know that our collective mission is to ensure that everyone in our community has the nutritious food they need every day. That is a very big task. That is not a small feat. But that means that we need everyone at the table. We need everyone involved, our businesses, community groups, and people outside of the anti-hunger world to make sure that we're able to provide food to everyone who turns to us for help. It also means that government is a key partner in getting that work done. And I think that's been made even more clear during the pandemic. If we want to truly tackle food insecurity, we have to reduce the difficult choices that people face when putting groceries on the table. We know that if someone is turning to a food program, chances are they're dealing with another issue. Maybe it is low wages, they're not able to get enough hours at work. Maybe it's something related to unemployment, a housing issue. Maybe it's related to health issues. Maybe their medical bills are adding up, their prescriptions are too expensive. There are so many reasons why folks turn to our network of programs, to all of you here on this call today. So as all of you know, government programs help us meet the need. Something interesting that I don't think folks truly understand outside of everyone here today is how much government programs help us meet the need. Before the pandemic, about 40% of our food came from the federal and state government. During the pandemic, however, our government partners really stepped up to help us get food out the door, and government sources made up 62% of the food that we distributed. That support was critical because last year we had 400,000 people turn to our emergency network of partners to get help because they had never asked for help before, or because they only had a few extra dollars in their bank account and they were living paycheck to paycheck. So government is a key piece of this public-private partnership to get food to those in need. Folks on the call already know about some of the great government programs that we operate, but just as a quick refresher, we operate TFAP here at the food bank. So we distribute free USDA food is how it shows up on the shopping list. Our CSFP program, which gives free senior boxes to low-income seniors in need. We also partner with the federal government on a number of kids programs and make sure that kids have meals after the school day's over and during the summer months. And then one of the really key partnerships happens at the state level, and that is with the Ohio Agricultural Clearance Program. That's the fresh, nutritious state food that folks see on the shopping list that's free. And it just wouldn't be possible to meet all of the demand that we see in our 6 counties without this critical partnership. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention how critical the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is, also known as SNAP or food stamps. In our 6 county service area, about 300,000 people relied on that program over the spring to keep food on the table. And for SNAP, for every 1 meal provided by a food bank across the United States, SNAP provides 9. So we know that the food insecurity rate would be significantly higher if it wasn't for that critical anti-hunger program, which is why SNAP is one of the cornerstones of our advocacy work. It's something that we talk about with our elected officials on a regular basis, because we could not do this work without a strong SNAP program. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit today. So for our advocacy work, I break it down into three worlds, 3 things that we do to advocate for our community and to advocate for food security. First is raising awareness. So we do a fair amount of work going out into the community, talking to business groups, talking to our elected officials about what hunger looks like in our area and what people can do to help. We also lobby, and that's what today's session is going to focus a lot on. And lobbying means just speaking to your elected officials about the work that you do, speaking to them about a piece of legislation that you support or that you oppose. During normal times, we go to DC and Columbus a lot. I know quite a few of you have been there with us in the past. Over the past few months, it's just been Zoom, a lot of virtual calls to our elected officials to lobby. And then the final way that we are able to engage in advocacy work is through asking our partners and our supporters to take action on an issue. We often send out emails asking people to take action on a specific piece of legislation. All of you have probably seen those emails many times, and those are really impactful in making a difference. So I find that most people are willing to take action on an email. They're willing to hit the send button, but it can be difficult for folks who've never done advocacy work before and reached out to an elected official. It can be difficult to take that first step and figure out how to do so. So what I wanted to do for the beginning of our session today was to talk a little bit about what elected officials find impactful and influential when you reach out to them on a piece of legislation. So I'm going to dive into that. One question that often pops up is, what is the best way to get my message to those in office? What is most impactful? What is the return on investment? So I wanted to share some information that I learned in a training a few years ago. On the next slide, what you'll see is the response to a survey question that asked, if your member or senator has not already arrived at a firm decision on an issue, how much influence might the following advocacy strategies directed to their office have on this decision? And this chart really changed the way that I looked to reach out to folks in office, because you'll notice that the first answer is visits from constituents. That means going down to the State House, going to DC, or inviting them out to your program. That's something that sharing with them the work that you're doing on a daily basis can be so impactful. For folks who are especially busy, they don't have the resources to look up every program, to understand every single thing that's happening on a day-to-day basis in the district. So any work that you can do to help, I know is very appreciated. The other thing I wanted to point out, and something that I took away from this chart, you'll see that at the top of the list as well is individualized email messages and letters. That is a huge return on investment. It doesn't cost a lot of money to write an email to your elected official, telling them about your program, the work you do, a piece of legislation that you're concerned about that's happening at the State House, something that you support that's happening at the State House that will help those in your community. And the same goes for a letter. It doesn't take a lot of resources to sit down and write a letter, but it is incredibly impactful. More than 90% of offices said that had a lot of positive influence on their decision on a piece of legislation, which I really think is key. You'll also see a few other items on that list that are impactful, things like writing letters to the editor, editorials, making phone calls is a big one. But I just wanted to break down some of those ways that you don't always think that it can be as simple as sending an email or a letter. You think that you have to fly to DC to make a difference, and that is not at all the case. It's as simple as sending an email. I also wanted to point out that there's form email messages and form letters that you'll often see, or petitions, and those aren't as high on the list. but they're a lot more impactful than not doing anything, than not reaching out, than not taking that extra step. So everything that you do in respect to reaching out to your elected officials does make an impact. Now, the next and last thing that I wanted to touch on today was about, well, if you do reach out to your elected official, what, in their words, is impactful? So on the next slide here, what you'll see is the results of the response to the question, how helpful is it for messages from constituents to include the following? And you'll see that the most impactful thing to share when speaking to an elected official is information about how the bill would impact their district specifically. I think folks often forget that if you're an elected official, you were elected by your constituents to represent them, and they take that so seriously, making sure that they're representing the people that have elected them into office. And they want to better the lives of the folks that have elected them into office. So that is the #1 thing that they're paying attention to. If you ever have information to share on what the impact of a piece of legislation would be on your community or on their district specifically, it's something that really sticks and it hits home. The second is your reasoning for supporting or opposing a bill or piece of legislation. I don't know if folks realize, I know especially in Columbus, and we'll get to hear more about this in a little bit, but our elected officials in Columbus in the Ohio House have one person working on their team. And that is one person and the elected official who have to go through every email that comes in, every letter, every phone call, every bill they have to monitor. So anything you can do to help really set the stage and explain why you oppose or support a bill and make sure that it's on their radar is really helpful. That's giving them the tools that they need to support or oppose a piece of legislation. And then finally on my list is a personal story. Personal stories are tough to share. I do not always share my personal story when I speak with an elected official, but it's something that's really impactful. So if you're comfortable sharing your story, maybe you've dealt with food insecurity in the past, maybe you've dealt with poverty, living on low wages, that's something that really sticks to people. I think back of, meeting with folks like a decade ago, and I still remember stories from people I've met with a decade ago. I will never remember a number that I heard a decade ago. So I think that's what sticks, and that's what can oftentimes change hearts and minds. So on that note, I want to stop speaking so that I can turn it over to my friend and colleague, Jory, to speak a little bit more about the media side and how partnerships can help create effective advocacy.
Thank you, Kimmy. That was a wonderful beginning to this conversation about how you can be a part of effective advocacy, representing the issues that you're concerned about for the food insecure folks that you serve day in and day out. So I'm going to start by talking about relationships because I think they're at the core of advocacy. And I just want to reiterate that similar to what Kimmy shared at the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, why they care about advocacy and these greater issues at the food bank here, we similarly at the State Association care so much about the way that federal and state policy and programs play into the health and food security outcomes for the people that our food banks and all of you at the member hunger relief agencies serve the folks in need day in and day out. We really believe that hunger is a symptom of poverty, that poverty is a symptom of widespread and systemic issues in our society. And so we know that we can't only be concerned about policies and programs that impact hunger and food insecurity directly, but also policies and programs and decision-making and conversations that impact everything that plays into food security, whether that's wage equity, racial and social justice issues, other poverty-related issues, things like access to high quality, affordable childcare, quality, affordable housing, equitable access to health coverage. So we really work on a lot of issues because we know that they all impact our folks. So that's kind of a broad baseline from where I'm going to be coming from as an advocate when I talk to you about how you can be a part of this and some of the role that I play in working in external affairs. And I'll start by, again, just talking about relationships. And I don't mean, you'll see a couple images here. You'll see Kimmy and I in the left. And these are a couple of the visits that we've had the good fortune to make at DC. But I don't really mean relationships in who you know or where you go. I really mean relationships which are about your reputation in the community. Do people in your community, do elected officials in your community, do decision makers in your community trust you, trust your organization? Do they know what you do? They know that you are a reliable source of information, that you have a direct connection with your clients who are their constituents, that you are really invested in the issues that you're expressing concerns about to them. And also, what are your relationships with the wider community of health and human service providers, social service agencies, clients and families that you formerly serve, that you're currently serving, businesses that you partner with to engage volunteers, to secure funding? What does that map look like? We do a lot of asset mapping in the world of advocacy, and that might be sort of a buzzword, but it really means, what are the collection of resources and tools and relationships that you have accessible to you? So you may, get asked by Kimmy and her team at the food bank to engage on an issue. So you might get an email saying, can you come to a site visit? Can we have a representative from the State House out to visit your site? And that's all about making sure that they're connected with the information that you have to give. So I just want to help you understand that when I talk about relationships, it's really the assets you already have accessible to you. It's about who you already know, who you partner with day to day. Let's say that you're a food pantry and you have a free health clinic down the street, and you make referrals back and forth to one another. That is a natural relationship for advocacy as well. Going back years ago when Ohio was fighting to expand Medicaid to low-income adults, we were at the forefront of advocating for that, not because it directly impacted food security, because it certainly indirectly impacted it, because we knew that if more folks had access to quality healthcare that they could afford or at no charge, that meant that they'd have more resources available in their pockets to afford the food and other basic needs. So we worked in coalition at that time, and I'm going to take you through a little bit of a case study on how we recently worked in coalition, as well as through earned and social media, to elevate a recent issue. So if you would go to the next slide, you'll see some examples of how your voice at the agency level can really help tip the scale in some of these debates and conversations. We recently had a state biennial budget pass here in Ohio, and the food banks across Ohio do rely, as Kimmy mentioned, pretty heavily, pretty significantly on state and federal investments in hunger relief and food programs. One of those core programs is the Ohio Food Program and Agricultural Clearance Program, which in a normal year provides 20 to 25% of all of the food distributed across the state by our 3,600 different hunger relief agencies in Ohio. And so we normally go into a budget process knowing that we're going to need to talk to our lawmakers about why we need that continued funding, why we might need additional funding to meet the greater need, especially given the impact of the pandemic. And we don't like to show up every 2 years asking for something, having not maintained that relationship, going back to relationships, throughout the 2 years prior. So advocacy is by no means just about coming and asking for something when you need it. If you have any of those friends or family members in your life that only reach out when they need something, or you understand how that can grate on you. And it's the same for a policymaker, a lawmaker who only hears from folks when there's bad news and something is needed. So it's important to cultivate those relationships, to have those lawmakers out to your site, to place the emails, make the calls, just so that they know who you are, and that when you do need to call on them and engage with them on an issue, they're ready and prepared to be at the table with you. So some of the examples recently in our most recent battle in the budget actually didn't end up being focused around our request for funding for our food assistance programs that are funded by the state, but rather by an advocacy fight that we were engaged in to protect access to the federal supplemental nutrition assistance program, or SNAP, that Kimmy talked about. And I imagine all of you are very familiar with, knowing that it provides about, in normal times, about 9 meals for every 1 meal that a food bank or food pantry is able to provide. It's really our core defense against hunger and food insecurity. And we were faced pretty suddenly with some really potentially damaging measures that would have greatly reduced access to SNAP especially for low-wage workers, families with children. So we had to pull out all the stops. And if we had to do that without having built relationships, without having been in coalition, without having built relationships with local reporters, local folks in the media that we could engage in the conversation as well, we would have been we would have been faced with a lot higher of a mountain to climb. So we came up on that, and you'll see some examples on this slide. On the left, this is more of the traditional engagement that Kimmy was mentioning earlier. We did have folks who, in the middle of a pandemic, frankly, put their lives on the line to show up at the State House, double masked, to talk about our concerns related to these measures that would have greatly reduced food insecurity for Ohioans. So that's a very traditional and high ask for most folks to make. You know, you have to be comfortable and able to get to the State House. So knowing that that's not always something that all of you are going to be able to engage in from day to day. Also knowing that hearing time is limited, and often that's not the first or only place that constituents can be heard. There's also many other ways in which you can contribute to tipping the scale. One great thing you can do is, if you stay in touch with the food bank, with the state association, with other players in the advocacy and the hunger relief world on social media, you'll know when those hearings are coming up, and you can elevate them. You can make sure that they're being talked about more and more in the online community. If you or your agency aren't very involved in social media and you don't know where to start, this is a great, easy way to get started, because there's ready-made content that you can simply retweet, share, comment on, or even just follow along with. It's really a great education tool to make sure that you're staying abreast with what's moving at the state and federal levels. So you'll see on the bottom in the center, there's also an example of one of our platforms to call or place emails, as Kimmy was mentioning. You'll definitely see these from the Greater Cleveland Food Bank team. If you're on our list, you'll see it as well. We'll send out these action alerts to you to let you know when there's something we need you to weigh in on. And similarly, we don't like to abuse that relationship with you. So we know that we're not going to only come to you when we have something to ask of you. We're talking to you today so that we're prepping you and laying that groundwork for when we do need to make an ask next time. So you may have seen an ask, you certainly did see an ask from Kimmy and the advocacy team here when we needed to call all hands on deck to protect SNAP. We can certainly engage in earned media outreach. So you'll see at the top in the center an example of the great leader here at the food bank, Kristen Warzoka, who's had an op-ed, for example, run leading right up to the end of the state budget. And the communications team at the food bank works hard to maintain their relationship with those local media outlets. They can be your partner in that. So we at the state, as well as at the regional food bank level, are always looking for experts in the community. You really know your stuff. And I know it can be intimidating to feel like you have to be able to represent a whole lot of other people in what you say when you're engaging with reporters or with policymakers, but trust yourself. You really are the expert. And, think about stepping out a little bit of your comfort zone. When you get a call from the comms team here, from the advocacy team here, and they're wondering if they can bring someone out to the site or have you talk to a reporter, take the leap. You can do this. You can prep some talking points for yourself to make yourself feel a little bit comfortable. I've been doing this for over 10 years, and I still do that often when I'm going into a conversation with a reporter or policymaker. Do your research to make you feel comfortable as you're approaching that conversation, and we will help you in that. We want to be your partners in making sure you have the tools and information at your fingertips to have an informed conversation, because this can get really nuanced. And that's the thing that I think is often intimidating. You can go ahead to the next slide. Keep in mind, though, that as Kimmy mentioned, our elected officials also have very limited bandwidth to be able to follow all of these nuanced policies in every single committee on every single issue that they have to be concerned about and weighing in on for their constituents. So it is vital that we recognize that they're human beings too, that they need our help as the issue experts to understand the greater impact and implications of some of the policy proposals that are put forward. So these are some other examples of different ways in which we in the hunger relief advocacy community engaged in our most recent fight to protect SNAP at the State House. There's more traditional earned media outreach. Kimmy made a wonderful appearance on one of the local affiliates. I think it was the ABC affiliate. I want to give them their cred because they did a wonderful job on the piece. But it's really, they've again maintained that relationship with that outlet so that they know that reporter, they know that they can have a conversation with that reporter about all the information, because this was a really detailed fight with a lot of confusing pieces that even a lot of our expert advocates we were calling each other, at 8 p.m. before a meeting the next day. Can you just clarify for me what would this piece here in this line in this proposal mean? So you don't have to be the expert on the details, but what you do need to realize is that you are viewed as an expert by the decision makers, and you should use that to empower yourself and take action. A couple other ways. Letters to the editor are a great, easy way to make your voice heard, and they really do matter. And the way that you can boost that again is if you work on your own or in partnership with the food bank to submit a letter to the editor on an issue you're concerned about, and it gets printed, which it's likely to do. Our local newspaper outlets really want to hear from experts like you about your opinions on these timely issues. Then you want to boost it further on social media. You want to tweet it out, share it on Facebook. You want to tag your local rep and senator when you're sharing that out. You want to thank the reporter on social media for running it. You want to thank the outlet for running it. You want to just get extra eyes on that issue so that it all is an extra drop in the big bucket of movement toward action in the direction that we know is important. There's also many different forms of sign-on letters. So in the bottom left, you'll see an example of some of the statewide policy coalition folks that came together to generate a sign-on letter that was not only about our food security and SNAP concerns, but about our greater concerns in the state budget. And we had hundreds and hundreds of signers on that letter that got submitted right at the end during conference committee in our state budget process. And every single name on that list mattered. It mattered because when we can show great volume in responding as a coalition, as a community concerned about people impacted by poverty, that matters. And that took a lot of relationship building across different organizations with different issues and concerns and areas of expertise. But finally, I just want to give a shout out for Jamie. You'll see in the bottom center of this slide. Jamie is someone living in poverty, struggling day to day to afford enough food for herself and her family. And she came down to the State House to engage in a press conference with a few other advocates. She was incredibly powerful, not because she was, all shiny and well rehearsed. She was incredibly powerful because she came vulnerable and she came willing to share, and she knew that it mattered. And I think that was only possible because she had a relationship built with an advocate in her community who could call on her in that moment. So think about that as you're engaging with your clients. If you need to make an ask of them in partnership with the food bank, build that relationship now as you are doing, and it can play dividends. And importantly, we elevated Jamie's appearance at that press conference further on social media. We pulled out some of the quotes and stories that she, along with other advocates, shared to make sure that it had eyeballs on it. When we go to a meeting with a legislator, or we have a legislator or a lawmaker or a staffer from those offices who are so critical to these decisions as well, whenever we see them in the field or at the State House or in DC, we talk about it and make it visible, because we don't want any of these issues to be happening in the dark, whether that's in a closed room with us at the table or whether that's without us at the table in a closed room. We want the public to know what's going on. We're proud and believe in our positions on these issues, as you should too. And we want to make sure that we have eyeballs on it. These days, reporters, policymakers, they are on social media, they're paying attention, and that matters. It's not the be all and end all. None of these are. Working together, every single piece comes together in a puzzle. And I'm really proud to say that because of all those pieces, we were able to protect SNAP in this most recent battle in the State House. And it's really a testament to a case study in engaging people where they're at. So we look forward to having you at the table with us as we engage in those battles going forward. And I'm just so pleased to get to talk about that a little bit with you today. And I'll turn it back to Kimmy.
Thank you so much, Jory. I feel like I learned a lot hearing from you, even though I get to talk to you about these issues all the time. So thank you for your expertise with us today and for making the drive to share with us. So for our final few minutes of this session, I am so excited to introduce Representative Juanita Brent. So she is our state representative at the State House representing District 12. Currently, she serves as ranking member of the Agricultural and Conservation Committee, and also sits on the Transportation and Public Safety and Commerce and Labor Committees. In addition, she is the first vice president of the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus, which is the oldest Black caucus in the nation, which is amazing. I did not know that. Prior to becoming a legislator, she sat on the Board of Trustees for the Harvard Community Services Center and Lee Harvard Community Development Corporation. I am so excited to have her here with us today because, as all of you heard from Jory and I about things that we know that have been effective when speaking to elected officials, but Representative Brent is the expert of experts when it comes to elected officials, because she is an elected official. And I will also say that I follow the representative on Instagram and social media, and I have been so incredibly informed and impressed by how much she goes above and beyond to make sure that folks understand what's happening at the State House and what's impactful at the State House, what bills she is voting on a weekly basis. She sends out a report. And I have found that to be so helpful for me in understanding what's happening at some committee meetings that you don't always have access to. So I thought she would be the perfect person to speak with us today about what she finds effective. So for Representative Brent, we'd love to hear from you about some advocacy strategies that you have found effective. So you get to listen to Jory and I talk about what we've seen in the data, and data says one thing, but we'd love to hear what you find effective. If there's any do's and don'ts when speaking to an elected official, and just anything that stood out to you since your time in office.
Yes. Well, just thank you so much for this opportunity. And my name is Juanita Brent. I just happen to be a state representative for Ohio House District 12. So like Kimmy said before, you know, being effective at the State House or just any level of government is so important, but you have to know the lay of the land. One of the basic things, particularly at the State House, is knowing our website. Being able to go to ohiohouse.gov and be able to navigate that. That is the same website that all of us legislators use when it comes to looking at bills, tracking bills, learning who the different members are, finding out people's phone numbers, emails. Going to that website is vital. And so even if you are looking for a bill or if you're looking for the schedule of things, the same time that we find out our schedule for committee is the same time that it's published on the website. So there is no backroom situation where people are finding out at a different time that the public is finding out too. So learning how to navigate that website to learn how to track a bill, and then also just introducing yourself, not just to the legislator that you are comfortable with, but even the ones you are uncomfortable with, because everyone has a vote when it comes to our public interests. So there are 132 legislators between the Senate and the House, And it's important that if you have any type of business that you feel that are coming through the State House, that you get yourself familiar with every single one of them, not even just ones that are on a particular committee, but every one of them. And just the first part is just introducing yourself. I can just tell you, Kimmy has come, and so is the Cleveland Food Bank has come to my office in Columbus, and they've also seen me in district, and they introduced, and the first thing they did is they asked me, what was I familiar with the Cleveland Food Bank? And interested enough, before I was a state rep, I used to volunteer here at the Cleveland Food Bank once a week. So I was very familiar with just coming up here, but that allowed us to open up the door on what type of relationship we were going to have going forward. So just asking people, what do you know about your organization? Are you familiar with it? Have you had any involvement with it? Then you can be able to gauge what your response should be going forward. Do you need to introduce your organization, or do you need to basically continue building that bridge that's already been there within an organization?
Representative Brent, is there any big no-nos when speaking to an elected official? I'm always interested to hear that when I talk to anyone, but are there any like big no-nos, any examples that you have of things that are not effective?
Never tell someone you owe me. I know somebody sitting at home like, well, they do owe us, we pay our taxes. That can always throw a lot of people off. Harassing or talking poorly to staff members, because one thing you realize for most of us reps, we are very protective of our staff. You mess with our staff, that kind of shuts down a lot of conversations too, or not planning ahead for an appointment. I've had a situation where I was leaving a committee and I was heading to another committee, and a group of people wanted to have a meeting right then and there. So not being respectful of the members' time and giving realistic expectations of a meeting. So if you say your meeting is supposed to be 15 minutes, stick it to 15 minutes. Or if you come to the State House unexpectedly, then there might be a chance that since you did not plan accordingly, that you will not be able to talk to the representative personally, and you might have to talk to a staff member. Also, do not be offended if you have to take a meeting with staff instead of the representative. There are times, even like today, I chose to come here. And so since I chose to come here, my staff is having a meeting with someone else. It was nothing personal, but it's just juggling of time of it's only one of me and a lot of you.
That's an honor to hear. So Representative, the other question that always comes to mind is, have you seen an advocacy strategy by a group of advocates or by like a constituent that you saw and it was just like almost like an epiphany and it changed your mind, or maybe it solidified your mind on an issue?
Yes, I can definitely talk about a situation where it was a group that did not actually exist in my region. And when they came to talk to me, they were in the southwest portion of Ohio. I said, well, what does this have to do with Northeast Ohio? And what they did was laid out the facts that correlated with their mission to how it would affect people also in my district. Giving people the facts of their immediate district just made the world to me. And like you said before, adding a story to it. So knowing the facts, how that relates directly to the district, to the person that's serving in office, and bringing that story ties everything in. And then also the consistency of it. So in a sense, they came one time and they introduced themselves, they gave out the facts, but then they also did a follow-up to see if there's any questions, invited me out to their site. So it was like a build up of multiple different things. My district is in Northeast Ohio. So for me to travel 3.5 hours away to a facility meant that they had really built up their case on why I needed to come and see them. And so those special steps really helped them long-term. And next thing I know, they were able to get the capital funds that they needed in this past capital budget.
So Representative Brent, one of our listeners wanted to know, for those of us who may not know where to start, what easy strategies do you have to start conversations with your elected officials?
Well, always start off with your immediate elected official that represents your direct area, and then ask them like, well, I have this interest of topics, particularly if you have concerns about SNAP or about food insecurities, who should they talk to? Hypothetically, if you have a person who does not want to help you do that, then you have to go the old school method and go to ohiohouse.gov and then click on the icon that says committees and then look for those who sit on the actual committee and reach out to them individually. And it will give you each person's email address as well as phone number, and just call them and say, hi, I know you sit on this committee. These are my concerns. What will be the best time to have a meeting, to do it via Zoom or in person during this time period? So that's always the best thing to do.
One question that I've asked a lot of elected officials is how, and I think it varies for everyone, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. Where do you get your information from? Do you rely a lot on Twitter, Facebook, plain old regular news, or where do you hear about things that are happening within the district?
Well, it's a combination of different things. We do have a policy team that gives us information. So they're really good about just giving us the facts of things, because I don't, sometimes even with the news, it might be opinionated and not so much factual when it comes to things. I also do read the news. Social media does help. Social media gives you the pulse of what's important sometimes to people. Also looking at your emails, there was a bill that occurred that we had to vote on. I received 283 emails. I will never forget that. And anytime there is more than 5 emails about a particular topic, I put that as a alarm of something we need to look into, that there is a concern. So looking at emails, and then also talking to some of my colleagues, are they receiving quite a few concerns for something? Another way that I get information is there's always different organizations that are sending out their own policy briefs about different things from on the national level, because Ohio is not unique. So the same thing that's happened in Ohio is happening in Pennsylvania, it's happening in Michigan. We're all very similar when it comes to policy. So also looking at what other state legislators are doing around the nation.
That was so helpful. I feel like now all of us have our homework to always find 4 other people to send an email on a particular topic. So we have one more question, Jory. I think we might be able to tag team this because I know that you pay attention to this bill as much as I do. But you talked a lot about the proposed changes to SNAP and how they ended up in the budget. And those came from, as we know, Ohio Senate Bill 17. And Representative Brent, if you've heard anything new on this, but do you know what the status of that bill is right now? Is that something that we should be watching as advocates, paying attention to? Could it come up in the future? I'll let you start, and then I can add on.
I think we should always be prepared, and for the likelihood that that bill or a similar bill may come up, whether in the Senate or the House, likely not until summer is over and our lawmakers are back together. It was certainly an untraditional and unconventional approach to try to include the provisions from Senate Bill 17 in the state budget process. I don't think that we can expect that those proposals are dead in the water, unfortunately, but I think it's a testament to all of the groundwork that we've laid. We have significant record in the public about our opposition to those proposals, as well as many lawmakers on both sides of the aisle sharing their reasons for opposing those measures ultimately in the budget. So we've done a significant amount of lifting to hopefully give us some muscles to flex if that bill or a similar bill comes back up for consideration.
And I guess I would just add to, I think just building on what you said, Jory, that we've seen this bill similar to what Representative Brent said. We're not alone. Bills like this have popped up in other states, and they're likely to pop up again and again and again, because a lot of the time bills that pop up are coordinated by a national effort, a national lobbying group, and that's what's happening in this case. So I think we have to be on our toes at all times, and I think laying the groundwork now so that when the bill does pop up again, our elected officials know that it's on its way, and that our Ohio senators know that the bill is still in committee. So I think that's really important for us to share. For all of our partners out there, if you're interested in getting more involved on this bill or a future bill that could look a lot like it, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know our contact information will be shared and you'll be able to reach out. And we'll also make sure that we update you as legislation moves forward. We send usually about 1 email a month with an action alert asking folks to take action. And we always really appreciate when our partners take action. I know a lot of you do because I get to read a lot of the actions that are taken. And I find that those are the most impactful. The folks that are on the front lines speaking to people every day, and especially people with lived experience with this issue. So I'm going to wrap up by thanking our 2 panelists today. I feel like I learned a lot being here, so I hope that everyone on this call also learned a lot. I'm also going to give one final question to the representative, just asking if there's anything else you want to share. I know most of us don't get to speak to our elected officials every day, so whenever one is around, I love being able to use your time and hear if you have anything else to share with our anti-hunger partners.
Building relationships are so vital. If people see that you are constantly around, they will make the intentional efforts to engage with you. And do not wait to the last minute when you have a concern. Show up right then and there before the problem becomes even bigger, and educate yourself on how the process is. I've seen people who get so excited when a bill gets passed out of one chamber, but then I have to remind them that their bill also has to get passed in the other chamber. So learning the process is vital. Learning how to navigate the ohiohouse.gov or whatever website that you are trying to, for that level of government, and making sure that you make sure you tell your story and tell the facts that back up your story. That's always very vital in this business. And just smile and just know that you are doing hard work and it's going to be worth it.
Well, I'd like to thank our 2 panelists again, and thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you for joining us for our conference this week, our first virtual conference. We are excited to virtually see all of you here and look forward to working with you on this really important advocacy work in the months and years ahead. Thank you so much.